I began to work with the concept of expulsions when I understood that this ascendance as a dominant category of inequality actually is not enough to capture a whole range of conditions that are becoming very extreme and that are better described maybe as expulsions. So when you think about inequality, inequality is a distribution. And in any specialized and differentiated system, you're going to have a bit of inequality. The question then is, how do I interrogate the category inequality? Because by itself, it's a distribution. So it can be more extreme, less extreme, etc. So I, for instance, argue certain kinds of inequality might be inevitable and reasonable if you ensure that low-wage workers get decent wages. So it's a question of social justice. At what point does inequality become injurious to the question of social justice? And what kinds of inequality actually can go along with a socially just, though even not socially equal, system? And so I began to think about the extreme condition. When the familiar, not the monstrous, not the horror, the strange, but the familiar becomes so extreme that our existing categories, conceptual, statistically, cannot capture it. That's the moment that it sort of becomes an expulsion. I really sort out a whole bunch of dynamics in the book, but certainly some of those that are part of that is the question of land grabs. So what we see as of 2006, the best data that we have from 2006 to 2010, 2011, over 200 million hectares of land were bought by about 15 governments and by over 100 firms. Now the question then is, when these types of acquisitions happen, what actually takes place? Well, what takes place is the expulsion of floras and faunas, the expulsion of sort of rural knowledge cultures, embedded either in rural crafts work or in rural small-scale agricultural work. There's a lot of knowledge there, out. Those people, those small growers, they wind up being flattened into urban slum dwellers. Erasure of all that knowledge, but also erasure of the capacity to make sure that the earth keeps on living. Plantation economies is the worst. So that to me was a critical element also in this whole story of expulsions, right? Now, at the same time, one of the other major issues is finance, which I describe as the key capability. Actually, it's like the steam engine of our epoch, not because it's everywhere and affects everything, but because it is capable of making new orderings, displacing, repositioning key elements. Not all sectors can do that, but finance can. And so one very simple way of then asking the question is, in this new ordering, what is in and what is out? So again, then we fall back into this sort of more radical notion, if you want, of expulsion. I got very, very interested in the poisoning of the earth. So I have an enormous set of case studies from all over the world. And at one point I also say, if you take the worst, the most brutal kind of mining abuse in the United States, probably the gold mines of Montana, and you take the worst, sort of the largest nickel producing complex in Russia, which is in the north of Russia, which is devastatingly brutal on the land. What matters more in today's world? That one is part of a capitalist economy, the gold mines of Montana, and that the other is part of a deep communist history? Or in today's world, as opposed to the world of 30 years ago, when that distinction, communist capitalist, might have ruled. I argue that in today's world is the astounding capacity to destroy the environment that both of these have. And in that way, you totally reposition activity X outside of the sort of interstate and an old geopolitics. So I do that with a lot. This is just a simple example, but I do that with a lot of stuff. I want to remark, reposition, get out of these categorical ways of organizing that we have inherited to some extent, from long traditions of scholarship, and which then these old categories sort of become invitations not to think. So I think of small steps. I think of trajectories. I've long done this kind of work. Think of the struggle by blacks for rights. It took 100 years. For women, same thing. At every step you say, this is going nowhere. This is going nowhere. This is going nowhere. The Occupy movement. Oh my God, they didn't create a party. They didn't get into power. It's going nowhere. No, it's one step in a trajectory that makes a zone that those who are out don't even see. Those who are not in there, those who are in the formal, but those who are in that zone, they know that they exist. So New York City is full of such, and I'm sure so is Rome. And secondly, and this sort of in a more systematic way, I've done quite a bit of work of how digital applications can enable low-wage workers and low-wage neighborhoods, low-income neighborhoods, to sort of, begin to work together, again, little steps, because often they hate each other. The neighborhood is not a place of love and peace necessarily, but there are certain tasks. You can help each other, you support each other, so that you begin to feel, I matter to this community. And every little intervention of that creates solidarities, creates a possibility, creates a belief that we can do it.